From Washington, D.C., this is a special Your Voice, Your Future town hall. Ferguson, America Reacts.
It is a rally cry born out of anger and now steeped in controversy.
And I'm tired of it!
Around the nation, protesters irate over the death of Michael Brown and clearing of Darren Wilson have halted most of the violence that destroyed businesses and caused chaos.
He got away with murder.
And have resorted to shutting down highways from D.C. to Philly, overtaking shopping malls and transit hubs. The president promising action.
This time will be different is because the President of the United States is deeply invested.
The federal government is now chipping in for body cameras, and Officer Wilson has turned in his badge.
I mean, you think they would accept me? You think it'd be safe for me?
There have been rare moments of healing, but regardless of what really happened on that Missouri street, the issues require more than a quick fix.
I'm much more likely to get shot or get arrested than my friend here.
Race relations, some argue, have taken a significant step back.
We may have lost one round, but the fight is not over.
And now the real challenge, how to eliminate an us versus them mentality, or is the divide simply too great to overcome?
Joining us now for a live roundtable discussion, Professor Michael Eric Dyson, Georgetown University sociology professor, political analyst, and author of a forthcoming book on President Obama and race. Benjamin Crump, attorney who represents the family of Michael Brown and represented the family of Trayvon Martin. Gary McElhaney, former Fraternal Order of Police president and former police commissioner in Maryland. Armstrong Williams, syndicated columnist and entrepreneur. And Jamie Allman, radio talk show host in St. Louis, Missouri.
Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Leon Harris. Thank you for joining us for this special Your Voice, Your Future town hall, talking tonight about the fallout from Ferguson. Over the next hour, we'll be talking with our panel here about the issues which have triggered protests across the nation and have reignited a debate about race relations in America. Now, remember, you can join our conversation tonight by using the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture. Now, Scott Thuman's going to be in our newsroom tonight following the conversation on social media. He'll be bringing us updates as well as we go along. So let's start with him right now. Scott, bring us up to date on today's developments.
Busy day, Leon. First off, today, Michael Brown's stepfather apologized for his immediate reaction following the announcement when, if you'll recall here in this video, he screamed that people should burn the town down. Of course, more than a dozen buildings were destroyed, and some say he should be charged for inciting the riots. Also, major developments today in New York on an unrelated case, but certainly spurring even more anger. A grand jury has decided not to indict the white police officer who killed Eric Garner by using a chokehold during an arrest for allegedly selling illegal cigarettes. That incident was caught on camera. And now there are worries of even bigger protests, especially in New York and D.C. And President Obama spoke just moments ago about the strong emotions we're already seeing tonight.
We are not going to let up until we see a strengthening of the trust and a strengthening of the accountability that exists between our communities and our law enforcement.
All right, already very quick reaction across the country. This just coming into us as we look at social media here. This is a picture of protesters shutting down Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House here. The fist of solidarity being shown, Penn Station, New York, and not far away, Times Square. We're seeing a lot of people show up already this evening. You're going to see a lot of this sign, "I can't breathe," the words of Eric Garner. Back up to you guys.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Now, let's get things started, first of all, by maybe taking the temperature of how things are right now tonight in Ferguson, where everything started. Jamie, you're standing by there. You got a talk show there on local radio. Give us a sense of the temperature there. What are you hearing from your callers? What are you hearing of note, especially?
Well, things have calmed down considerably over last week, although now, of course, we have almost a virtual national media obsession now with trying to prosecute the stepfather here, which A, absolutely is probably not going to happen. B, it is terribly difficult to actually prosecute somebody for inciting a riot. And C, there's not really any proof that indeed his words were what caused the riot. If you can get people rioting and lighting fires over the victory of an NCAA basketball tournament, you can certainly get them in the wake of this very controversial decision by the grand jury. But things are very calm here in St. Louis now, with the exception of this kind of poking the stick in a smoldering fire. And in fact, even today, we had legislation introduced by a local lawmaker who wanted to reform the muni court system, because in the backdrop of all this, we have a tension that is actually artificially created by these small governments utilizing police to collect their revenue because they're not creative enough on their own to do it. And so what's happening is you're creating this automatic tension between the speed trap guys and the guys who are literally having to be tasked with picking on the citizenry and the citizenry. And so we're seeing some developments there on a constructive level, even if we do have some of the fire breathers still breathing fire.
All right, very interesting. All right, thank you, Jamie. Down, Benjamin Crump, you represent the family. You have been in Ferguson more recently than any of us. First of all, tell us the most obvious place to start is what is next for the family? What is it exactly right now that they plan on doing next?
They continue to try to push forward to get something positive out of something so negative. They truly wanted to have the killer of their unarmed son held accountable. They still pray that the Justice Department will bring charges, but they are trying to figure out how to make something positive, how his legacy would be remembered. And so they want the proposal for the Michael Brown legislation, the video body cameras on all police officers all across America, so it will be transparent what happened, and you don't have to see this play out in the aftermath like it did so horribly in Ferguson.
We'll get to that in just a second, but before I move on, I have to ask you this because it's something that we've been sitting here wondering amongst ourselves. There was no violence for 108 straight days, okay? You had to know while you were sitting there in that tinderbox, you had to get a sense that something was simmering. Looking back now in retrospect, is there something that you, your team, the family, your colleagues that came into town, is there anything that they should have done or they should have said that they did not to keep this from exploding the way it did?
I don't think you can put it on victims grieving who lost a child in that manner to say they're going to be responsible for the community's response. I think it's the elected officials, it's the local leaders that have to say, believe in the system. You can trust us. We have to work on having trust amongst each other. And I think the problem with Ferguson is not different from many cities all across America. A lot of people in the minority communities don't trust the local law enforcement and the local leaders, and so we all have a job to do. The police have to reach out because they're the people who chose to be police. The leaders chose to run for office. They got to say, we're going to represent everybody, not just selected groups.
But I don't want to spend too much time on the point. But you were the one on television. You and your colleagues were the ones on TV, so that those of us on the outside looking in, you were a leader as well. Right. I mean, you can say what you want to about the elected leaders. And Leon, so that's why I'm asking, as leaders, was there more you could have done?
We constantly ask for peace, for people to act in a responsible manner. His mother and father, I know everybody's talking about his stepfather and that reaction after the announcement, but all the lawyers who work for my team asked for peace. But there's a lot of frustration going on in the community because people see it over and over again. The young people of color are killed, their death is swept under the rug, and nobody's never held accountable. What they said here was this was broad daylight. They're not going to be able to spend this. They're going to be held accountable. And that's what you saw happening in St. Louis and all across America. They said, not this time.
So let me move on to Gary and get the law enforcement perspective on the same exact question about what should have been done to keep that pot from overboiling the way that it did. That police department, the law enforcement community there, I mean, it appeared to be just incompetence at every single level. From the outside looking in, that law enforcement force looked as though they were preparing to contain a riot, not to prevent one. What more should they have done from where you sit as a professional?
Well, as we said from the very beginning, no police department in this country, I think, would have been prepared for what happened that day, particularly a city like Ferguson, okay? No experience, no training leading up to this incident, okay? We saw that from crime scene preservation and those type of things. Ferguson is no different than hundreds of cities in this country where there's this dynamic going on right now between law enforcement and the citizens, mistrust on both sides. Okay, both ways. It's now becoming us against them both ways, and that's dangerous. Okay, and in Ferguson, from the very beginning, I believe it was a lack of training and a lack of leadership, not only from the police department, but from the elected officials in town. Where are they taking responsibility for any of the things that led to what happened in Ferguson? Where are they taking responsibility for the poverty, for the crime, for the unemployment, for the lack of education? They're dumping it all on police officers. Okay, the low rung on the ladder, so to speak, when it comes to civil servants. The grunts out there 24/7 trying to do the job. But the people that make policy, they've been nowhere to be found.
All right, let's talk to Jamie Allman about that. Jamie, your thoughts on that?
Well, as a matter of fact, the Ferguson Police Department had very few complaints against them. In fact, Officer Wilson in that Canfield apartment complex, he was often there, and in fact decided not to wear his taser specifically because he didn't want that intimidation factor, and never had a complaint against him. So the Ferguson Police Department itself, up until this particular incident, there wasn't even a shooting in Ferguson for a year running up to it. But my friend over there is absolutely right, though, about the fact that the political leadership, and in defense of Michael Brown's family, I mean, they were the most vocal in trying to keep people peaceful in this town.
Police brutality is
the alternative
not
to
the
give
rule.
everybody guns?
It's not at all.
Most
Most police don't behave the way that what we saw.
We're not talking about most. We're talking about what happens, though. But see, look,
but you cannot build this distrust among black and police.
I'm not building it. It's already existing. It's not building. It's not an arbitrary, artificial construction.
And what has to happen to fix that, or at least start the process of fixing that, is the cataclysm that's already happened. So we'll get into that. But I want to get back downstairs to Scott Thuman, who's standing by at the newsroom. He's been monitoring social media, and he's got something that he heard or has seen that's going to actually help us figure all this out. Scott, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Leon, the emotions that are being expressed there in the studio are certainly being expressed on the streets tonight. And it's, of course, because through social media, people are able to galvanize very quickly. We want to show you the immediate results we're seeing here in Washington, D.C. tonight. Through social media, it was spread that there would be a gathering. Large groups now taking over streets along Connecticut Avenue. Earlier, they were at Vermont and K. Prior to that, 15th near Pennsylvania, right by the White House. They have stopped traffic multiple times, and all of this a way for those passions to be voiced. Now, aside from the protests, which have remained peaceful at this point in Washington, D.C., Leon, we want to point out that a lot of times people online are reacting not just to what happened in Ferguson, but also to celebrities, what they have said in the aftermath of what we saw in Missouri. We want you to take a listen here.
The cops are actually awesome. You know, they're the only thing in the ghetto from between this place being the Wild Wild West. So this notion that cops are out there just killing black men is ridiculous.
I would love to just interview white cops. The question isn't why they shoot so many black kids, which is horrible. The real question is, like, how come you never shoot white kids?
I feel like the president needs to come down there, because when your parents come in the room, whether it's you or your cousin that knocked the vase down, both of y'all sit up at attention, and everybody, as my dad would say, tighten up.
Leon, certainly opens up a lot of avenues for discussion, doesn't it?
Absolutely, an avenue that these gentlemen here have already chomped at the bit to get down. It looks like Chris Rock was taking notes from you about.
I did talk to him. Look, because what Chris Rock recognizes is the following: that if it's not a black versus white, which ultimately it is a police and community problem here, it's broader than black or white. But the problem is white kids don't get subject to the same arbitrary exercise of force as black kids. I was at Ben's Chili Bowl the other night, 3 weeks ago, late at night, 3 o'clock. 2 white kids were cursing the police out. They were manhandling them verbally and rhetorically. You know what the police did? Son, you're drunk now. You go home. They get hit on the back of their hand and reproved, which is what police should do, because you have a moral responsibility to de-escalate a situation. But when African-American people are involved, we can't help but bringing to bear all of our beliefs about each other, white versus black, black versus white, Latino, and so on. But the point is, it's not equal. Now, I don't think the resolution is arm everybody with a gun. I'm saying the people with the gun have a bigger responsibility not to use lethal force.
There's been lots of talk about using cameras on police officers to try to stave that off, to keep that sort of thing from happening. Scott Philman has been looking at that particular angle of this, because this week President Barack Obama asked Congress for federal funding to buy some 50,000 body cameras to record the interactions between police and the public. And Scott's got to look at what's been some mixed reaction to this idea. Scott, what did you see it here?
Yeah, and the timeliness really important, Leon, because as a matter of fact, NYPD tweeting out just today a picture of the body camera they say they're going to be moving forward with. And yes, a body camera could have clarified what happened in either Ferguson, either damning or perhaps exonerating Darren Wilson. And really, this is how. What you're seeing is a forceful tackle of a suspect from the dashboard camera. Critics could argue it's excessive, but here's the angle from the officer's body camera, revealing a sucker punch by the suspect, prompting that takedown. But sometimes it's police who are in the wrong, so President Obama wants cameras nationwide, 50,000 of them, for about $75 million. Here's Officer Darren Wilson, who wasn't wearing one when he shot Michael Brown.
It's going to prove the innocence of police officers when they say it, but it's also going to weed out the bad ones.
Like in this scenario, a Daytona Beach, Florida officer approaching a former NFL player holding a knife to a woman's head. You hear the officer pleading and then opening fire.
There are so many more properly behaving police officers than the few who occasionally don't.
So right now, D.C. Metropolitan Police, they're testing out cameras. The chief thinks that could cut down on complaints against officers by as much as 80%. You've got L.A. and New York City also in test phases. Baltimore's mayor just vetoed a bill that would require cameras, but that was really more of a legislative issue. She says she does support their use and that they will be widespread eventually. Leon.
All right, thank you, Scott. Now, I'll ask the obvious and simple question. Does anybody believe that a camera in Ferguson would have made the difference?
No. I think it would have been transparent, though, and a lot of people would have saw what happened, and you wouldn't have had so much people. We would have knew what happened. It either would have exonerated the police officer or it would have convicted him.
But let me ask Attorney Crump. Look at what happened with Eric Garner. Eric Garner, we had a clear tape of this man begging for his life, saying he couldn't breathe. We see the application of the chokehold around his neck, and I'm saying it still didn't turn out. We couldn't even get an indictment returned from a grand jury.
But you know what, Dr. Dyson? The video camera isn't the problem. The video isn't broke. It's the system that's broke.
That's my point. So what is the body camera going to do?
We need the body cameras to make it transparent, because without the body cameras, can you imagine the narrative if there were no videos on Eric Garner?
Oh, of course.
Can you just imagine?
Let me ask you this question, though. I don't want to ask the police, too. So we know most cops are doing their job and they're doing it well. We know some cops dirty. They throw down.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Wait a minute. They throw down. Look. They throw down a gun and try to pretend that. You know what I'm asking you. Cameras can be manipulated too. Let's not act as if the camera.
These cameras can't be not manipulated.
Oh yeah. You can start and unless you're telling me that it takes it from one. It takes it from one.
I want to mention
one
thing about the camera, and it goes back to what we were discussing about the mind. It plays a psychological game with you, knowing. You know what it's like when you watch people send out selfies. Some things we would never think of doing because it's on camera. A camera, even for you, what you may do off camera when you walk off the set, you're a different person when you're on your set.
I've even heard reports that the cameras are preemptive, and that in cases where cameras have been on an officer and have been in plain view, the suspects or the persons being involved in the interaction, they behave differently because they know they're going to be seen, and the officers have done so. So they say in many cases it's actually preventative.
We're looking at reality TV.
I don't have a problem with cameras, but and that's an issue. We need to have policies around them that are proper. The president thinks, if he thinks this is going to solve our problems by putting 50,000 cameras on police officers.
Well, no, his proposal actually involved $263 million for the cameras were only $70 million or so, but it also provided for training.
But we need to have policies for the release of these type videos. I think personally, that they're going to exonerate far more police officers from false accusations.
Well, then it's fine.
Okay? So I personally don't have a problem with cameras on police officers. Well, and I put them in my cars when I was chief. We were one of the first departments to put the digital cameras in the car, because of allegations of racial profiling, and my officers and my complaints went right down there.
Can I ask you,
right down to
why do you think so many black men are being killed by police who are on our? I mean, honestly, what do you think
I think law enforcement is asked to go into certain communities, and clean them up. Okay, that's the term that's used by the elected officials, because that's how they get elected. Okay, they get elected based on crime rate in certain communities. So there's this blind eye to, I want you to go in here and do the job. You know what? And when things go bad, I'm nowhere to be found. Because I ask you to go in here and get me reelected.
I want to raise. I just want to raise this
more often than not. But one more note on the camera issue: if we don't have policies, all we're going to do is be providing footage for reality TV shows.
I just want to mention this.
Because they're just going to run hours of video.
We sit and have this conversation. It seems to me that we care about the genocide of black men. A genocide of black by law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
Do we have the same outrage if it's a black on black police officer, if it's black on black crime? Do we have the same outrage? How do we save Chicago? How do we save other places, not just Ferguson? We get hyped up when it's Trayvon Martin. We get hyped up when it's Ferguson. But thousands of blacks are killed every day. How do we have the same outrage, except it from people all around the country? That's what I'm asking.
You of all people should know, look, I've led marches against people who have been killed by other black people. The news media is not there. There is no surrounding circumstances where people are celebrating that. There are constant, look, on here in D.C., a mother's crying on television. They have the surveillance camera of a young black man entering a building and leaving, and the mother is pleading for knowledge. Black people don't go, we're going to exempt him from moral critique because he's another black person. That's a red herring. The point is that black people who kill black people often go to jail. White cops who kill black people often can't even get indicted to go to jail.
It's amazing to me to see how much power this has developed. It's turned into a threat to some.
It used to be raise the roof. It used to be raise the roof.
But you see these young people coming up with this, I think it's great.
It's beautiful.
You know, when you talked about the hoodie, when all the young people said the million hoodie rallies, and now the young people, they frame the issue and they say, regardless of what you agree or not, it becomes a bigger symbol of their feeling they don't get equal justice.
I'm just curious. I'm curious as to why law enforcement in St. Louis were so outraged and offended by the raising of hands. From your perspective, should they have been?
I could care less what anyone in the NFL,
How about the NBA? Okay. No.
Or the NBA.
We know where your sentiments are.
Or any of our professional sports has to say about criminal activity. I put the integrity of police officers up against many NFL players.
So you were offended?
Yeah.
But look, when you look, black people. This is why
I wasn't offended.
You are offended.
I was not offended because
you're kidding me. Your body language is saying something entirely different.
We're talking about NFL players or Chris
Williams'
Rock,
body language
or Chris Rock,
expert.
or
I love it.
Like that.
But can I give you the history of that? The history is black people who were entertainers who had more fame than anybody else represented their people. Black people who were athletes said, look, I have a level of fame and recognition and celebrity. I'm going to leverage that fame and celebrity on behalf of those who will never be famous. So the point is, it's not a matter of offending anybody. It's saying I will stand up and represent powerfully for the interests of those who are not able to stand. So I applaud them for at least recognizing.
And the crux of the matter, just to change for a second, the crux of the matter is this: the whole foundation of the American justice system is trial by jury. This notion that everybody will get their due process, have their day in court, and they'll be treated fairly. The minority communities and police shootings and brutality cases are never getting trial by jury.
Yeah. Well, listen, the ultimate representative of the justice system is the President of the United States. Should he be in Ferguson? Should he have been there by now?
Well, let me just tell you, the president first should have waited before the Attorney General gone into Ferguson in the beginning until the jury rendered its decision. I think that's because I already think you prejudice the situation. I think he should have stayed out of it.
George Bush showed up.
We're talking about Obama now.
But you said a president. He's not president.
Bush is out of office. We're talking about Obama.
A president showed up. It's a principle.
Again.
No, I'm praising Bush. I'm praing your Bush. I'm saying that
my Bush now.
Right.
Okay,
your people's Bush.
Well, let me let you praise my Bush.
Okay,
Go ahead, praise my Bush.
Bush showed up in 1992 in Los Angeles. Lyndon Baines Johnson shows up at the scene of the crime, so to speak. The hurt. The president doesn't have to go there to say, I take sides one against the other. together because police people are citizens as well. What he goes down there to say is your president is concerned about the flashpoint of injustice, the trajectory of tragedy is here, and I will insert my body. I will physically be here to say I am willing to listen to all sides, but I'm also here for those who feel that their perspectives are not being heard. I want to show you that the President of the United States loves you and is concerned about you. Sitting in the White House, making prognostications about it.
There's no bigger symbolic
Leon, he
gesture
cannot
than
win. There's such a burden on him because he happens to be black. That President Bush.
But it doesn't mean because as I'm a black citizen,
you know, he
that
just
I should
cannot
be
win.
underserved
because
they
he
will
is
say, worried about his blackness.
They will say that he's there only because it's a black issue.
But they say that about the budget. They say that about everything else. If he takes
we're
heat
talking
about
everything
Ferguson.
Else, you asked the question. We're talking about Ferguson.
I'm telling you this: if the president can take heat for his views on ISIS, on gay marriage, he can take heat for his views about this is not about black versus white. This is about the president showing that he has empathy for those who are vulnerable, whose backs are against the wall.
You seem to be upset with him, by the way.
Right now, we
don't put words in my mouth.
We have
I voted for him twice.
We just have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
We've got to let Jamie home and get one last chance.
As a result.
All right, guys, come on. We got to get Jamie in here. We're paying for the satellite time. We got to give him one more chance to weigh in here. Go ahead, Jamie.
Oddly enough, even if there's a debate over whether President Obama should have come, the political pressure on the process actually, ironically, led to a grand jury process that actually has now remained in question and has made even more people suspicious. I mean, Bob McCullough took a very unusual approach to this grand jury situation, in part because there was so much pressure on him to make sure it was thorough. But in the end, what happened is we got a grand jury process that even Antonin Scalia would have said was not really the kind of grand jury that one would normally have. And so now it's created even more of a problem. So in my opinion, the fewer politicians and the fewer pressures on the legal system to be played out would have been better.
Jay Nixon could have stepped in. Jay Nixon could have all been avoided. Right. Jay Nixon could have removed Bob McCullough. I'm with my colleague here. The politicians are leaving the police out to dry. Absolutely. And the reality is, if Jay Nixon had stepped in and said, look, I know this is going to be a powder keg. Let me remove you because your father was killed in a shootout with a black suspect. All of us are human beings. We understand why you might have some bitter feelings about that. Let's get somebody in there who doesn't have your history of not ever holding police people accountable, and let's get a fair and unbiased person in.
Was it a conflict of interest?
The governor failed in his responsibility. The prosecutor failed. The mayor failed. Those people were failed, as my friend said here, by the political system.
And when we look at the grand jury proceeding, you say, boy, it didn't seem like he was impartial. It did not seem like
that's why I asked you at the outset about the Justice Department's investigation. Do you think are you going to be pushing them to be looking at Robert McCullough? Is there some kind of, I don't know, some way to hold him accountable for what happened there in your view?
You know,
didn't they say the court system could remove him now?
Yeah,
I mean, could still
the
have
governor
another
could appoint a special prosecutor
right now and to rehear another grand jury,
and
right?
At least do it the right way like this, and everybody can see what they want to see in the evidence. But when you have the trial by jury, you have cross-examination, the evidence being vetted, and that's why we believe we get the truth out when you argue for your side, I argue for my side, and
but don't you, as a prosecutor, don't you, an officer of the court, don't you have a responsibility to bring all the evidence forward?
No, prosecutors are always trying to make their case up.
Because Leah said you can't do when it was little black boys trying to offer exculpatory evidence in the grand jury. The Supreme Court said no. But that is not the function of the grand jury.
Is it fair that I choose witness A over witness B?
No,
they always do that. They should.
Gentlemen, as I said at the beginning, we do not have time. We do not have time to we cannot litigate this. We are not in front of the grand jury.
Justice Scalia.
We only have about a minute and a half. I know, because we only have about a minute and a half left. Here, I'm going to give you a chance to speak. Here's the thing. I do want to leave this on something of an upward note here. Again, we're talking about where we stand as a country 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 years from now. I want to know what it is that we're going to have to see to prove that we learned something as a nation from this. What is it we should see?
That we pay attention to the disproportionate numbers of people of color in this nation because of the economic inequality that exists, but also the police brutality that is directed toward them.
And
if we resolve that, we'll be a
we got to learn to respect one another. You can't have what that officer said about Ferguson community and about Michael Brown Jr. He's a demon. He's Hulk Hogan. And this is a terrible community. Nobody wants to be there. It got to to be respect for all communities
Gary,
in your precinct.
We
got to respect the police.
We as a country need to commit the resources to these communities and stop blaming the people we put there to fix the problem.
Okay, we only have 30
I
seconds.
think when you see the protesters and the diversity of them, it shows that we're outraged over injustice, not race, black or white, and that's racial progress that continues to build in this country.
I'm outraged because we don't have any more time. All right, that's it. Unfortunately, we do not have more time. Jamie Ullman, thank you so much for being with us from St. Louis as well.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you for joining us for tonight's Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Thanks to all of our guests and for joining us here. Thank you for those of you who sent in questions. I'm Leon Harris. Good night, and here's hoping for a good future for all of us.